Dear friends, we are going to start this session. I have the honor to open this session about a major aspect of the subject matter of this conference, namely ethnic democracy as a way of accommodating majority-minority relations. This title, to be sure, raises many questions, and I would like to express some of them as general introductory remarks. There is a tendency in today's literature of the field to accept the notion of ethnic democracy, which Sammy Smooha was one of the first to coin it, and in its following, we also witnessed the formulation of the notion of ethnocracy, which we find in the title of Benny Neuberger's talk that we will hear in a few minutes. At this opening stage of the session, I would like to question these notions with the wish that our honorable presenters will address these interrogations. There is no room here, of course, to define what a democracy is and repeat that it is grounded in universal suffrage for the designation of the political supreme authority and the legitimate rulers. A regime that is also grounded in liberal values and where governing bodies are submitted to rules of self-restriction regarding the exercise of the authority. All this being acknowledged, notions like ethnic democracy or ethnocracy want to designate forms of regimes which do share characteristics of democracy, but on the other hand, also exhibit forms of permanent domination of one ethnic group over the other. If this definition is correct, my first interrogation refers to the fact that this session speaks of ethnic democracy as a form of accommodation of majority-minority relations. It may indeed be asked, maybe too naively, how can this kind of domination constitute a setting for conflict resolution or accommodation when it in itself designates a conflictual situation and what the conflict is about, that is domination. Another interrogation refers to the very conceptualization of ethnic democracy and ethnocracy. This kind of conceptualization seems to insinuate, and I will be happy to be gainsaid by the speakers, that democracy as such, and which is not ethnic, is not a relevant concept wherever domination relations exists. Actually, it is quite common knowledge that majority-minority differentiation is the very condition of democracy, which results from free organization of ideas and interests and their confrontation over power. We know, however, that this division of the society into a majority and a minority becomes problematic when the game remains unchanged for a long time, sometimes for several decades. We remember the case of Christian Democrats in Italy, or social democrat rule in Scandinavian countries, situation where one had dominant parties and which created many problems. Though it seems that this never led anyone to depict these regimes as non-democratic, despite the permanence of power conjunctures. What does seem to justify the above conceptualization refers thus not to the possibility of protracted power conjunctures, but to the fact that the protracted majority-minority cleavage is grounded in different and antagonistic ethnic groups, as if this constitutes a non-legitimate political division in a democratic society, as if a majority may not share an ethnic identity that differs from the minorities and take profit of its position to articulate symbols and interests that diverge from the minorities. At this point, I would like to raise to the reflection of our presenters the cases of England and the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, for example, until recently. These regimes obviously cannot be excluded from the camp of democracies. Actually, they are vibrant examples of liberal democracies, and England is the very mother of this type of political regime. Though we know that England is a country with a state religion, where the head of the nation is also the head of the church, and that a first-rate citizen is an Anglican. Are the notions of ethnocracy or democratic democracy applicable here? This sounds awkward, as we know how far the diversity of laws minimizes here the cost of not being a member of the dominant group. This, of course, is due to the fact that English democracy emerged in the context of a liberal culture, which, in a general manner, has been the rule for Western democracy. It is in these circumstances that the efficacy of the notions of ethnic democracy and ethnocracy can be debated, especially when one knows that any society, and today more than ever, is divided among other lines by ethno-cultural cleavages, and that these divisions do impact in one way or another on the power relations prevailing in society, which may often be enduring and quite permanent. There is room here to ask about the relative cost and benefits of conceptualization in the vein of ethnic democracy or ethnocracy when compared, for example, with the notions of Western democracy versus non-Western democracy. By non-Western democracy are designated today a long list of democracies throughout the world, from Japan, Singapore, Korea to Eastern Europe and Balkanic states, and I would add Israel as well. In many of these cases, we see that ethnicity plays an important role in the formation of power relations and the differentiation of majorities from minorities. What, however, makes the difference between these cases and Western democracies is that while the latter emerged, as we said, from liberal cultures, in non-Western democracies, liberalism, or more exactly liberalization, comes after the installment of democratic regimes. Liberalism is first implemented in the political game in its strictest sense, that is, respect of political pluralism, later on in the strengthening of the independence of the legal system, and from there to additional progressively widening areas of social activity. In each case, according to its own rhythm and under the impulse of its own constellation of power relations. If this scheme does say something about the reality of today's world, the question is how it accommodates with ethnic democracy or ethnocracy regarding the study and discussion of majority-minority relations. These are the questions that may be kept in mind when we hear the honorable presenters of this session. Sammy Smooha is professor in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at the Haifa University and research fellow at the Jewish Arab Center. The university specializes in minority rights in multi-ethnic societies and Israeli society. His most recent work focuses on democracy and national minority issues in Israel, Slovakia, and Estonia. He has widely published on the internal divisions in Israel. Priit Jaerve has been the director of the Institute of International and Social Studies in Tallinn, Estonia, and has acted as the plenipotentiary of the Estonian president to the Estonian Roundtable on Minorities. In May 1997, Priit Jaerve joined the European Center for Minority Issues in Flensburg, Germany. He has published on democratization of transitional societies, multiculturalism, language policies, inter-ethnic relations, and ethnic democracy in post-Soviet era. Priit Jaerve is acting currently as an independent researcher. He lives in Bethesda, Maryland, US. Binyamin Neuberger is professor of political science at the Open University of Israel. He specializes in the area of democracy in Israel, the Arab minority in Israeli politics, dictatorial regimes, and is also a well-known Africanist. Among his numerous works, I would like to single out the book he wrote about the genocide that took place in Rwanda in 1994. We will hear all these three presentations and have question comments afterwards. Please, Professor Smooha.
Thank you very much. Alright. I'm speaking about Slovakia, about the national minority in Slovakia, the Hungarians in Slovakia, 11% of the population, concentrated mostly in the south-west, alongside the border with Hungary. Now, in the Constitution, in the preamble to the Constitution, it's written, "We, the Slovak nation, bearing in mind the political and cultural heritage of our predecessors, the experience gained through centuries of struggle for our national existence and statehood." So the idea, the founding of this new state of Slovakia are not the citizens of Slovakia, but rather the Slovak nation. Means the ethnic Slovak people of Slovakia, they founded the new state of Slovakia. And apparently they own the state as well, because they founded it. And then in another reference in the preamble is, they talk about the historical legacy of Great Moravia. Moravians were the enemies of the Hungarians. So they see themselves, the ethnic Slovaks, the majority, they see them as descendants of the Moravians, who are the enemies of the Hungarians, and the Hungarians in Hungary, of course, are part of the Hungarian nation. So in this way, the Slovak majority, as a matter of fact, designs the state, the new state, from 1993 on, as the state which belongs to the Slovaks. And you can understand the various features of the state as Slovak features. The language is Slovak language, the only official language. The Hungarian language is recognized only when in a locality you have 20% or more Hungarians, but that's not enough because you have to apply and to get the permission of the Minister of Interior to ratify, to bear witness to this, so you can use the language in schools or in other areas. All the symbols of the states are strictly Slovak: the flag, the anthem, the state seal, heroes, whatever you can think of, the calendar, all are in Slovak. There is a third layer of government in Slovak. They divide the country into, I think, 9 districts, and the zoning, the borders of districts were demarcated in a way to prevent any district with a Hungarian majority. So it was done purposely to avoid such a possibility, despite the fact that 80% of the Hungarians are concentrated in the southwest, near the border. When privatization was made in Slovakia, in the Czechoslovakia, and then afterwards Slovakia itself, it was very clear that it was done in a way to discriminate against the Hungarians. Now, many of the Hungarians are in the south, and they are farmers, and their communities need also some land for expansion. There are unclaimed lands, and the Hungarian communities, again, they don't get their share of this lands. So there are various policies then that they are really designed, these policies, to prevent the binationalization of Slovakia, that Slovakia will get a character, any character which is binational. 11%. 10 and 10.6. Now, in Slovakia, the Slovaks feel threatened. They feel threatened, first of all, of the minority. The history of the minority is such that they feel a threat. First of all, they feel a threat because of potential disloyalty of the minority. And if you go through the history, it looks like it is justified. The Hungarians live in area which was ceded from Hungary in 1920. And then in 1938, after the occupation of Czechoslovakia, then there was a puppet state, Nazi state was created in Slovakia. And this region where the Hungarians live now was ceded back to Hungary. And the Hungarians are accused of collaboration with the Nazis. And after the war in 1945, then there were what it's called the Beneš decrees. The president of Czechoslovakia declared the Hungarians and the Sudet Germans as guilty of collaboration with the enemy. And then for 3 years, the Hungarian minority was subjugated to disenfranchisement, expulsion, ethnic cleansing, expropriation of property, and so forth, for 3 years. And then, after when the communists took over in 1948, things become became more stable. But there was a fear that the Hungarians will be irredentist, but not only the Hungarians will be irredentist. Hungary is irredentist. I mean, Hungary has some historical claims to this area, and they were afraid that they will instigate the minority to destabilize Slovakia. Another fear that the Slovaks have is about the character of their state. They want strictly a Slovak, ethnic Slovak state, and no binationalism, and they were afraid that the struggle of the minority and giving in to, say, a claim for autonomy will compromise the ethnic nature of the state. So these are the fears that the Slovaks want to avoid, and they took various measures to contain this threat. Now the question is Slovakia democratic? Yes, it is democracy. I mean, it has all the features of democracy. It is accepted into the EU. Otherwise, it will not be accepted if it's not a democracy. All the Hungarians have rights, political, civil rights like others. Not only that they have rights, they are well mobilized. They have their own political party, and in fact, they are 10% of the electoral of the electorate, and they are well represented in not only in parliament but also in the government. They are part of the coalition government since 1998. Now, what brought about this kind of system that I am describing? It seems that when Slovakia became independent in 1993, there is already a search of nationalism, Slovak nationalism. And so the Slovaks for centuries were subjugated in one way or another, first to the Hungarians, in a way also then to the Czechs. And then in 1993 they felt they are free, and now they want to fulfill their national aspirations, and the state is the fulfillment. An ethnic Slovak state is the fulfillment of their national aspirations. But this kind of state also functions, or it's supposed to contain the threats that they felt. They felt a threat from Hungary. They felt a threat from the Hungarian minority, and an ethnic state or ethnic democratic state, in fact, helps them to contain this threat. Now, they can do that because they are a large majority. The Slovaks are 77% of the population. The minority is 11%, and it's a manageable size. You can deal with that, even if they have a good representation in parliament. Now, they also went through all this, and they got the legitimacy of the EU. They were accepted into the EU. There was no problem about that. I mean, this nature of the state is legitimate and is accepted. Okay, this is about the Slovaks. How I'm doing with time? 5 minutes left or left? Okay, good. Now, Slovakia is a case for me of what I call ethnic democracy. And I came to it from the study of Israel. For me, Israel is the classic case of ethnic democracy, and I universalized the Israeli case at the end of the 80s, and then I looked for examples. Are there other cases of ethnic democracy? Now, what is this model of ethnic democracy? It's based on the idea that you extend democratic rights to all, but at the same time, you institutionalize domination of the ethnic majority. So you do two things which are contradictory. I mean, the whole model is based on inherent contradiction of democracy and domination of the ethnic majority. It's a system which is in between non-democracy and consociational democracy. It goes both ways, because in this system you extend collective rights to the minority, unlike liberal democracy. Now, this type of democracy is geared to contain threats or existential threats from the point of view of the majority. It is conceptualized to begin with as a low-grade, low-quality democracy because it violates the basic principle of democracy of equality. But also it is a dynamic, a flexible system. For this reason, because it's conceptualized as a flexible system, the claim is it is a stable and a viable system. Now, it's created to begin with as a conceptual tool to expose the low quality of democracy of that country. Very quickly, I will say 5 minutes. I don't know how many minutes you took, but let me just outline the model.
I am the ethnic majority.
It's based 2 minutes. The features are, I mean, there's 3 parts into the model. One part is ethnic ascendancy. It's clearly the majority takes over, and institutionalized. It's not just that they happen to be dominant. It is designed to be dominant and to prevent the erosion of their dominance. The other part, the features of the model then are ethnic ascendancy, perceived threats, that the system is functional to contain the threats, and the results is democracy, but diminished democracy. The second part of the model has to do with the emergence, the causes why such a system arises, and the causes are that there is ethnic nationalism of the majority, which precedes the creation of the state. So you have first the nation, the ethnic nation, and the ethnic nation creates the state. So they create the state to serve the ethnic majority. There are real threats or perceived threats, and the system works for that. And there is the minority has to be small, or has to be manageable. Otherwise, you cannot have such a system. And then I talk about the stability. What are the factors for stability? Let me go to the third part, which I will take 3 minutes. I take the liberty of 3 minutes. This part has to do really with the central thesis of the whole project. It's a project. It's not just about Slovakia. It's not just about Israel. The idea is, the central thesis is, that the new old states of Central Eastern Europe, when they democratized, this kind of system can serve them very well, because they become democracies and they keep ethnic dominance. They care for, the majorities care for ethnic dominance, but at the same time they democratize. So they can synthesize two conflicting features. This was the main idea of the universalization of this idea of ethnic democracy. So I was looking for other countries to see if the model is working, and Priit, who uses this model for Estonia, then he came with the idea that to use this model for other countries in Eastern Central Europe, and then we initiated a project of 7 case studies in which this ethnic democracy model was applied. And the seven countries or areas are Estonia, Latvia, Serbia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Kosovo, Macedonia, and Georgia. So all these 7 cases, they were. Then we have a book, a volume, which we both co-edited, and this volume there are chapters for each one of these case studies. And then there are 2 chapters, one introduction of the model, and the last chapter is summary or lessons from the applications. And let me finish by saying that in the summary, the concluding chapter of this book, the book is called "The Fate of Ethnic Democracy in Post-Communist Europe." Of last year. In the concluding chapters, I said that none of these 7 cases has become ethnic democracy. None of them. I mean, there is no real emergence of ethnic democracies in this area. So my central thesis was not confirmed. Why? Because of various reasons. One reason, some majorities are too big to accommodate. The states are too weak, because to have an ethnic democracy you have to have a strong state which can deliver, and so forth. And there are other reasons. And then finally, but it doesn't mean that the model is useless because of that, because it's a tool to study a case and to expose some factors in the dynamics of ethnic relations. But I would end up with this, with the note that our standards of democracy are so low that ethnic democracy is acceptable. I mean, if a country, I mean, it's legitimate, it's acceptable. It's not problematic as far as the EU to join, or the UN and so forth. And as a matter of fact, now there are some cases now which join the EU and they are accepted. This means that they are given even more legitimacy. And the case of Estonia may be one of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Smooha. Please, Professor.
Thank you very much. And when I was writing my paper, when I was writing my paper, I put the heading making sense of Baltic post-Soviet nationalism. But now I think I will try to concentrate more on the model of ethnic democracy and try to answer to these, at least one of these questions that our chairman put forward. as to whether this is accommodating minorities and majorities or not. Well, let me still give a very short background. I'm going to talk about 3 Baltic states, mostly of 2 Baltic states, Estonia and Latvia, but 3 Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. They are small states, young peoples, historically speaking, and you know, populations magnitude is also small. You go from Estonia, slightly more than 1 million, to the south to Latvia, slightly more than 2 million, and further to Lithuania, slightly more than 3 million people. And by the end of the Soviet period, there were in Estonia, Estonians, the share of Estonians was 61.5%. In Latvia's share of Latvians for 52.0%, and in Lithuania, the share of Lithuanians, ethnic Lithuanians, were almost 80%. So you see slight differences. Latvia has the largest population of minorities, and Lithuania has the smallest, and therefore in Lithuania all these democratization processes, they took a different character and different way. Well, I'm also want to say that, of course, these states were first created for Estonia and Latvia only after the First World War. Lithuania, together with Poland, had state formation already centuries ago, but then again, from the 18th century, they were all part of Russian Empire until the First World War, when they became independent. And they started as a parliamentary democracies, but these democracies collapsed into authoritarian regimes, which actually offered and mobilized didn't mobilize people to reject the Soviet takeover, which was in the wake of a Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and differently from Finland, where people started armed war against the Soviet aggression. In Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, no shots were fired, and so that's still bothers. It's sort of a part of the trauma until the nowadays. But then there followed a long period of Soviet domination, and probably with Gorbachev, things started to change, and I think that these Pandora boxes are manufactured by history, but they can be opened or not opened by some influential people. And sometimes they can be opened by mistake. And I think the Gorbachev opened the Pandora box of national, various problems or inter-ethnic problems by promoting his glasnost or openness policy, which enabled the Baltic and other people to speak up and to start expressing their interests, their historic grievances, and so on. Well, it was not that immediately the nationalism came forth in the Baltic states, but there was a sort of evolution in that direction. First was environmental period when the populations were protesting against industrial projects which were planned by Moscow. Strangely enough, at the same time in all three republics, which would have caused environmental damage plus additional immigration of workforce. And, and this induced creation of green parties and various protest movements which were successful. The next period was period of popular fronts, which were already going for democratic reforms. They managed to change their party leaderships in the republics, and then already they also were instrumental in revealing the Molotov-Ribbentrop the secret protocols, and this, of course, was a blow to legitimization of the Soviet rule in the Baltic states. And then already later the more radical nationalist organizations took over. So we have the situation in '92 when, as I said, there was big minorities, mostly Russian-speaking. 80% of them are ethnic Russians, and then there is a possibility to start an independent state. So what to do in this situation? And there were two conflicting intentions in especially Estonia and Latvia. One was to grab as much power as possible, to political power, economic power, into the hands of core ethnic nations. And the second was, of course, to be democratic, to try to move towards European and other international institutions, become member of international community. Well, the compromise between these two principles in Estonia and Latvia was a regime which had these features of ethnic democracy, which Sammy just told, in this as defined in his model of ethnic democracy. Let me just give you an example how Estonia introduced ethnic ascendancy. I think it did it in a very elegant and at the same time very blunt way in the preamble of a constitution, which says that Estonian state has been created by all. I'm not just giving you word by word, but the essence of the or the logic of this preamble, by civic nations, by all citizens, by all ethnic groups, not differently from Slovakia, not only by ethnic nation, but by all, for preservation Estonian ethnic nation and culture. So all groups decide to create a state for the protection of one group, for the continuation, preservation, and so on. So it was clear that what is the role of these other groups, and sometimes it has been even used in courts. This provision of preamble, let alone various newspaper articles, political statements, where the references to this notion are very common. In Latvia, it was not in the constitution, but it was in the preamble of language law of 1992. Or Estonian constitution was also adopted in 1992. And which Latvian preamble of language law says that Latvia is the only ethnic territory in the world which is inhabited by the Latvian nation. It's also a clear claim that this is our land, this we are even ethnic territory. Now, the perceived threats, of course, are clear. They are the big minorities, Russia, Russian speakers, Russians, and these threats, of course, are not written directly into legislation, and it's even deserved mentioning that Estonian, Latvian, Lithuanian legislation does not use ethnic terms. So it would be not correct to the letter to say that Estonia didn't give citizenship to Russians, because, well, it is the end result, but it is just because they didn't give citizenship to those who were not citizens before the war. And some Russians even were, so some Russians got citizenship, but not all. You know, they have avoided this ethnic terminology in legislation, but the legal principle of restoring the pre-war republics has worked towards the exclusion of all those who came during these 50 years of Soviet rule to Estonia and Latvia from citizenship. And these people can become citizens through naturalization, which is not so easy for them because they have not all very fluent in language, which they have to pass a test to get citizenship. The diminished democracy is also not in laws, but it's achieved by putting language requirements in many occasions to various to professions, as requirements in many cases, which people have to be more or less fluent, and even if you if you are fluent, then of course your name will give you away, because Estonians and Latvian names are different from Slavic names, and then you anyway might be not hired. The Estonian and Latvian firms are not equal opportunity employers, and this labor market has a tendency of ethnic segregation, and there are Russian firms, Estonian firms, and not very many mixed firms. So there are also various unwritten rules that officials or employers are following, various phobias and prejudices. The idea was, of course, to get rid of many of these minority members, to try to push them out. And this has been achieved to a certain extent. Let me tell you, in 1989, there were 1,726,000 Russians living in the three Baltic states, and when the censuses were taken in the year 2000-2001, there were almost 500,000 less. I think our Israeli colleagues would be happy to have such dynamics in their Palestinian minorities, but yes, some but some would be. These numbers are coming down, but they're still quite high. I mentioned that the citizenship was not provided automatically to all Soviet-era settlers. This can be seen as a control system, which is the first line of defense that ethnic nation uses to regulate access to political process of these Russian speakers through naturalization. And this has been working. The people have been naturalized in Estonia more, in Latvia less, and the system so far, at the present moment, there are still 136,000 people under the control system in Estonia and 418,000 people in Latvia. And what is the future of this system? Of course, in Estonia, some 5,000 to 7,000 people are naturalized annually, and approximately the same amount of people are leaving system in various other ways. So in some 7-10 years, there will be no citizens of Soviet origin left in Estonia. Well, but by that time there might be new immigrants left. New immigrants arrived already, but we see what then will happen. In Latvia, the tempo of naturalization has been lower, and there might be some I don't know, 20, 30 years if they go with the same pace. But nevertheless, Latvian politicians are scared. They have even proposed to stop naturalization process because the new voters may change the political balances. So let me then try to answer this question of whether this has accommodated majorities and minorities or not. I think it was not by chance that this was a question mark after this question. It's really a very it's really a question, and my answer to this question basically is that it has not accommodated. It has instead, well, what it has done, it has given really power to titular nations. And if we look at how they are represented in parliaments, how they are represented in government, how they are represented in courts and so on, so everywhere titular nations are overrepresented and minorities are clearly underrepresented. So they feel on the national level they are down. In Estonia, the non-citizen can vote on local level, and in local level they have done better. If they are in majority in some local locality, I looked at 12 towns where they are in majority, and in 9 of them they are also in majority in municipal council. So they are doing, I think, normally. But in general, they of course are disappointed because in period of popular fronts, they expected that they will get. There was a sort of democratic mood that they will also get citizenship, which they didn't get. They even voted for the tens of thousands of these Russians. They voted for the Estonian and Latvian independence and the referendum, but after that they didn't get anything. And therefore I think that the problems remain, and I would just enumerate some. what are the issues that still are there? The continuing accumulation by minority members of negative experiences of their lower status. Continuing low-level participation of minorities in political life and their underrepresentation in state administration. Transformation of ethnic differences into social differences through unemployment and lower income, and formation even of ghettos. Discrimination of minority members in labor market. Unclear consequences of the quality of education after mandatory switch of language of instruction in minority high schools of Estonia and Latvia. And cultural and social marginalization of minority youth, the growing drug use and HIV infection. So we can say that some low-level ethnopolitical conflict is can be observed currently in Estonia and Latvia, less so in Lithuania, and we as I said, it looks like the democratic system, which was in the form of the mixture, combination of a control system and ethnic democracy, has rather conserved, has institutionalized this conflict. Although international community organizations such as Council of Europe, European Union, UN bodies, they have, of course, criticized in the form of recommendations regularly Estonia and Latvia, and Estonia and Latvia have made some adjustments in the legislation. And without that, things could have perhaps been different. But still, it looks like Baltic states need some extra time to tame the dark sides of their national feelings. The question is whether history has reserved this time for them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now, please, okay. Professor Neuberger.
Okay. When Professor Tamarkin called me up and asked me to talk about ethnic democracy, I told him immediately that I'm not a supporter of ethnic democracy, but he said it's okay. I was looking forward for a fight with Sammy, a supporter of ethnic democracy, and Oren, a supporter of ethnocracy. And then when I got the program, I discovered that one escaped to Sri Lanka and the other to Slovakia, and I stayed in Israel. Okay, now... I support this model, but I don't support it. Okay, but now I will skip the whole theoretical discussion because I don't have time for it. I will present my model, which is, I call it liberal democracy with 4 flaws. I will say why I reject the other models and why I suggest my approach, which I don't regard as a model. First, I reject the approach which says that Israel is not democratic. And there are some who call Israel a control system like Kimmerling, a non-democratic majoritarian system like Yoav Peled, even somebody calls it Herrenvolk democracy. It's very interesting that nobody calls it dictatorship, because I think even these people know very well that you don't have a dictatorship where you have free elections, a change of government, limited government, the rule of law, and citizens' rights. I also don't accept the basic assumption of these theories, that Arabs in Israel are like non-citizens and equal to the Arabs in the occupied territories. That is one basic assumption. I accept that there are formal and informal aspects in Israel. For instance, basic law of the Knesset, which allows disqualification of parties which don't recognize Israel as a Jewish democratic state, or discrimination in children's allowances. I accept that these are deviations from the democratic model. I don't accept that these deviations are on such a scale that they make Israel a non-democratic country. The next model I want to discuss is a model with which Oren Yiftachel is very much identified, and that is describing Israel as an ethnocracy. That is also in the title of my talk. Now, Oren defines ethnocracy as not democratic but not authoritarian. In Hebrew we say, אני לא מכיר חיה כזאת, okay? We don't know such an animal. I mean, it's either more democratic or more authoritarian, but just in the middle. Now, Oren himself admits that there are many democratic characteristics in the Israeli system. He talks about procedures, institutions, democratic procedures and institutions, citizens' rights, about an autonomous judiciary, about an independent media system, and so on. And I think basically these are characteristics of a democratic system. Now, one basic assumption which I also don't accept, which is also basic to the ethnocracy concept, is that the territories, the occupied territories, are already part and parcel of the State of Israel. And certainly, if that is the case, then Israel is not a democratic country, because then 40% or 45% population has no citizens' rights and no right to vote and so on. But he regards Israel proper within the Green Line, as he calls it, imaginary unit. Now, I don't think that is correct. I think the efforts which were made since the late 70s to incorporate, annex Israel also mentally have failed. There is an excellent book on that by Ian Lustig, who compared the relationship between Algeria, France, Ulster, Britain, and the occupied territories in Israel, and said in all three cases there was a failure to convince the people that it is one entity. And the failure to convince the people will mean that there will be a separation. And I agree completely with Ian Lustig. So I don't accept that the territories and Israel are already one system. I also don't accept that, and this is also a basic assumption of ethnocracy, that while in democracy the demos is ruling, all the citizens, in Israel the ethnos is ruling, and the ethnos is defined as the Jewish citizens of Israel plus the Jewish non-citizens of diaspora, while the Arab citizens of Israel have no share in rule and in government in Israel. I think this is a wild exaggeration. I think the impact and the influence of diaspora Judaism on the government and politics in Israel is a very limited impact. They don't vote here, they don't sit in parliament, they don't sit in government, I don't think they are crucial in the crucial decisions made by the Israeli policy. I also don't accept that the Arabs are completely out of the picture. Without the Arab parties in parliament, we would have had no Rabin government and no Peres government between 92 and 96. We would have had no Oslo agreements passed through the Knesset. We would have had no disengagement from Gaza. We would have had no presidents Herzog and Weizmann. And even in this year, 2006, the present government is one result of the 10 members of the Knesset who belong to the Arab parties, because what we call the leftist bloc, center-left bloc, has only 60 seats. And only the 10 seats of the Arab parties prevented any other option. They are not part of the coalition, I know, but to say that they are completely out of the political system, I don't think that's true. So what I want to say is there is a demos in Israel, and it consists of the Jewish citizens of Israel and the Arab citizens of Israel. I'm not saying that they are completely equal, but to say that the Arab citizens are completely out of the picture and the Jews of Brooklyn are completely in the picture, I think this is a wild exaggeration. Another argument of the ethnocrats, or basically Owens, is that we have a process of... Both are good friends of mine, but okay, we disagree. Okay, I will come to Sammy later. Owens talks about a dynamic process of Judaization, which he says expulsion, the prevention of the right of return, expropriation of land, and so on, and this is an ongoing process. Now again, if the territories are part of it, that's one story. But if we talk about Israel proper, expulsion, partial expulsion, and prevention of return relates to 48-49. We heard a lecture about it today. Now, if that is the case, then if that prevents Israel from being democratic, then Poland cannot be democratic, and Czechoslovakia cannot be democratic. They have expelled more than 10 million Germans after 45, and nobody argues that because of that they cannot be democratic states today. With regard to expropriation of land, basically inside Israel proper, and I don't agree that it is an imaginary unit. We heard in the other panel that this is basically the solution which today everybody thinks will be the solution, basically along the green line. Basically expropriations were ended after 76, after the land day in 76. I don't think there is a basic contradiction between democracy and the existence of a Jewish state, which I regard as a democratic nation state. I don't think there is a contradiction between democracy and the law of return, the kind of which we have in many other democratic countries, the link to the diaspora, and even, and this is maybe more problematic, the goal of the state to preserve a Jewish majority. I think if the means to achieve that are legitimate and democratic, that also does not contradict the democratic character of the state. Now, I accept that there are flaws in the Israeli system. I mentioned already the basic law of the Knesset, the existence of lands which are defined as national lands and cannot be purchased or rented by Arabs, I think, is another flaw. I think the existence or the activities of the national institutions, what is we call in Hebrew Mosdot Leumiyim, in regard to settlement and so on, who service only Jews, this is another flaw. But again, I think the overall picture is not such that this undoes the characteristics which I defined before. Now, Israel is also not a full-fledged liberal democracy. I agree with that. And I don't accept the definition of liberal democracy only as a democracy based on liberal individual rights. I think this is not anymore, and I mean, we have today modern concepts developed by Robert Bella, by Joseph Raz, and so on, that also consociational democracy, multicultural democracy, which also recognize group rights, are basically also liberal democracies, modern definition. So a liberal democracy would be, I would say, a system where there are citizens' rights and human rights are central, where minorities are protected, where the government is limited, where you have the rule of law, party pluralism, social pluralism, free elections. With that regard, Israel deviates in 4 basic aspects, I think, from this model. One, the occupied territories. We'll dwell on it later. Second, the discrimination which exists in certain areas, and I already gave a few examples of Arabs in Israel. So I would say there are violations of the principle of equality, and the state is not neutral and fair enough towards the minorities, so that I would regard as a second flaw. The third flaw is the status quo in regard to state and religion, what in Christian countries is called church and state, that we have no civil marriage, that certain categories of the population cannot legally marry, that Reform and conservative Judaism have no equal standing in Israel, and so on. And the fourth flaw is a constitutional situation, that we don't have a liberal democratic constitution, and we don't have also basic laws and even regular laws which enshrine the classic liberties. We have only two basic laws which touch on these liberties but don't deal with the central liberties. And we have other pieces of legislation, partially from the British period of mandate period, which are authoritarian. Now, after dealing with liberal democracy and ethnocracy, let me deal with ethnic democracy. Sammy has defined the concept, so I don't have to repeat it. I don't see a basic difference between the so-called ethnic state with the minorities to the classic nation state, which had also minorities. And I think as a classic nation state could go together with democracy, that applies today. So I don't see... It's true that in strict liberal theory, the theory is indifferent to ethnic distinctions, but in fact, and here I agree with, I think, what Jaerve said in the first day, in reality, there is almost no state which is totally indifferent to ethnic distinctions. We have states which have built nations, we have nations which have built states, but basically also in what we call civic nations there is an ethnocultural core, and also in the other case where ethnocultural groups have built states, the so-called civic nation is not totally absent. I just give an example. Canada, without Quebec, is a civic nation, but it has an Anglo-Saxon core. Quebec, which is a so-called ethnocultural nation, but today they extended the definition of Quebecois also to those who don't speak French and are not Quebecois. So the distinction is really, I think, in a way, artificial in a sense, in an extreme way. I don't reject it as like ideal types. I think the ethnic democracy, there is one thing to talk about inequalities, to talk about deviations from the ethnic from the democratic model, but what ethnic democracy does, it builds a model which is unequal, and I think that has to be rejected. We can say there is a certain inequality, a deviation from the model of democracy, but I don't think it's right to build a democratic model which inequality is inbuilt into it. Now, why do I not accept also this model in the Israeli case? Certainly you could argue if you reject it altogether, then you don't have to discuss Israel. But I don't want to accept such an easy answer. I want to deal with Israel. First of all, I want to mention that those who support the model, there are many contradictions between them. I just give one example. Sammy regards Israel as an ethnic democracy also between 48 and 66. Yoav Peled regards it as an ethnic democracy only between 66 and 90. And until 66, it's, according to him, it's not an ethnic democracy. Sammy also lately differentiated between hardline ethnic democracy, standard ethnic democracy, and improved ethnic. I would say the improved ethnic democracy comes already closer to my model. Now, I think also there is one big danger, and this is serious, and we have this discussion already for 10 years. I think there is a danger that ethnic democracy legitimizes any deviation from democracy and any injustice done to minorities. With that, I agree with the ethnocrats, okay? With Oren says it, and Eyal Gross, and...
Can you speak louder?
Okay.
And to ask.
Okay. To whom do I speak? To myself? Okay. Eyal Gross, who is one supporter of the ethnocracy model, who is a professor of law, has said that all his students defend every injustice and every deviation from the Israeli model by quoting ethnic democracy. Now, Eyal Gross admits, and I admit too, that Sammy always says it's not a normative model, it's an empirical model, a scientific model. But Gross says, I'm not saying it, but maybe Sammy want to react to it, that by saying that this is the appropriate model for Israel, he makes it a normative model and not only empirical. Now, I'm even not sure that this debate is so important. What I think is important is not the intentions, but the result. And the result, I have the same experience, that by citing ethnic democracy, every deviation from democracy is legitimized. Now, if I look at the characteristics of ethnic democracy, I would divide them into two groups. There are the characteristics which I think don't contradict normal democracy. I don't think the concept of a Jewish state contradicts democracy. Even the non-recognition of the Arab minority as a national minority, and I would have no position of recognizing as a national minority. But France did not recognize the minorities in France as national minorities, and nobody argues that because of that, France is an ethnic democracy or an ethnocracy. The symbols of the state are Jewish, I agree, but I think somebody mentioned already the symbols in Scandinavia or Switzerland or Britain, you have the cross. I don't think that Muslims or Jews in these countries argue that it is not a democracy because the symbols of the state are Christian. Or that non-believers argue that Britain is not democratic because of God Save the Queen, where God appears, okay? Now, certainly there are other characteristics which are mentioned by the ethnic democracy theory, which I accept are deviations from democracy. I mentioned already the basic law of the Knesset, the activities of the national institution, and so on. Now, to sum up, why do I support the concept of liberal democracy with four flaws? First, because I think the general picture is basically one of liberal democracy. We have citizens' rights, human rights, protection of minorities, limited government, rule of law, pluralism, and free elections. I don't see a contradiction between democracy and a Jewish state, the law of return and the symbols of the state. I think a model which says democracy, liberal democracy with flaws, does not legitimize the flaws because it says these are flaws, these are deviations from the model, but it doesn't make it built in because the flaws can be removed and can be repaired. How many minutes? 2 minutes, okay. And for instance, if we withdraw from occupied territory, the 4 flaws become 3 flaws, okay? Now, I repeat what the 4 flaws are. 1, the constitutional situation, no liberal constitution, no basic laws or other laws which deal with citizens' rights, basic liberties, the press ordinance, emergency regulation, and so on. Secondly, religion and state, we talked about it. By the way, another criticism of the ethnocracy model and also the ethnic democracy model, that they concentrate everything on ethnicity. But there are some basic flaws of Israeli democracy which have nothing to do with ethnicity. And this is the religion and state issue, the constitutional issue. Not everything is ethnicity. Excuse me? No, I think the non-recognition of Reform and conservative Jews, this is within the ethnic Jewish community, but this is a basic flaw of Israeli democracy. It has nothing to do not with ethnocracy, I mean, not the ethnic democracy concept and not the ethnocracy concept relate to that. I agree, and this is a final point, with regard to the third floor is certainly the occupation, occupied territories, and with that we all agree. The discrimination of the Arabs. I think here what I'm saying and what Oren is saying and Sammy is saying are more or less the same things. I mean, maybe with the exception of the law of return, the symbols of the state and service in the army, I agree with almost the whole catalogue of discriminations. Nevertheless, I think that empirically and also normatively, liberal democracy with 4 floors is the right approach. It's not a model. Because, as I say, I don't accept ethnic democracy as a model, as I don't accept that there is a Jewish democracy or an Islamic democracy. I think, basically, these kind of models are diminishing the value of democracy. Thank you.
I don't know really how much time is left, but 20-25 minutes. Okay, so we will ask the floor to speak out, and then we will leave 2 minutes for each speaker to react. Okay? Please, Alain.
Thank you for the presentation. In fact, I have 3 questions and comments for more or less for all of you. To begin with, to Sammy Smooha, you said you studied 7 cases having in mind the model of ethnic democracy, and finally your conclusion, if I understood you well, is to say that none of those cases was in fact an ethnic democracies. So I wanted just that you elaborate a little bit on that point, because at first sight I studied at least 2 of these countries. I had the clear impression that it was in fact a kind of ethnic democracy. At least there was a titular nation which had much more power than minorities. So I just wanted your Macedonia. Second thing, in Priit's presentation, when he spoke about the question of citizenship, he said that there was an avoidance of ethnic terminology. I mean by that, you said that when it was Latvia or Estonia, one of the 2 countries, when they restored citizenship, they said that they will grant citizenship to all those who were citizens before 1940. So it was not an ethnic level. But my point here is that in this kind of state, ethnic terminology is always avoided when it's possible. But those states use a kind of tricks, in fact, to differentiate very easily. And of course, I have to think also about Israel, because when you look at Israel and the citizenship law, they never say in the law that the law was in 1950. They never say in 1952. They never say that they will not grant citizenship to the Arabs, but they say that all those people who were not on the territory held by Israeli forces between the end of November 47 and January 49, I think, cannot get citizenship. And it just happened in a way that all Arabs who were outside the country, of course, couldn't apply for citizenship. So this is the same kind of avoidance of ethnic terminology, but in fact the result is clear for everybody. Third point, to Binyamin's presentation, I think that maybe we can think about another name, but there is something which differentiates states with ethnic links from liberal state, classic liberal state. You said that all states are linked to a culture. Of course, maybe 1 or 2, it depends. When they are multinational states like Canada, they are linked to 2 cultures. and Kimlicka has showed quite clearly that there is absolutely no possibility for any state in the world to be neutral in cultural terms. That is obvious. But for me, it makes a lot of difference if this culture is institutionally linked to the state or not. And here comes a difference. You raised the parallel with France or maybe the US or Italy. Of course, all these countries have a dominant culture. But the question is that this culture is not institutionally linked to the state. And this makes a lot of difference with states where this link is in the law and gives privileges to the titular group. This is the difference. Of course, you will never have a completely neutral state. But if this culture is linked, it has a lot of normative and legal consequences. That's the point for me. In these ethnic states and liberal classic states.
Okay, please be short. Okay.
Okay, well, try. I think there is a problem here that my work has been analyzed in detail. I don't really have a chance to properly answer. I think perhaps this is why Moti asked me to talk about Sri Lanka. It's a kind of a setup. But you see, this is the conspiracy mind. No, it's just a joke. But I would invite everybody to read what I've written, which fleshes it out in detail and answers every point I think that was answered here. But I'll just try and be in 3 or 4 main points, and also to answer Ben Raphael's comments in the beginning. It is worthwhile to come up with a concept if it's convincing, if it actually tells us something, if it's and that's why it's neither one nor the other, because it's a different type. That's the claim. It's a different type of regime. The claim is that structurally, regimes that facilitate, that the main project is the seizure of contested territories and power structures, are of a different type. This is the main project. It'll be 1 generation, 2 generation. As long as they expand and overtake other groups and powers over contested lands, they construct frameworks which are non-democratic. This doesn't mean that they don't have some democratic features. I differentiate in my articles and some others that I've written, like Eyal Gross and Asad Ranem and Sandi Kedar and many others, between structures and between features. The features, the surface could be democratic, but below there could be other processes. And I'll just answer 2 or 3 points. I'll start with the last one, that you said that we only, Sammy and myself, only treat the ethnic, that is the Arab-Jewish divide. It's not true. If you read a lot of what I've written, much of it also relates to the religious cleavage. And this is why I make the connection that the orthodoxy of Israel is related to the exclusion of the Arabs. It's the church, the Jewish church, that decides really who is a Jewish citizen, who really has the right to become citizen of Israel. In that respect, it serves the state to have the orthodoxy dominance. This is just one example. I also talk about class and about other cultures. But let's look at 3 points that you made, and I also always make the point that things are not black and white. Things are many shades. Just the scholar has a responsibility to highlight what is the main thrust of a particular phenomenon without saying this is yes or no. The area of the regime. How do we analyze a power structure, which is the regime? I claim that you analyze the logic of power of the whole area that the regime controls. Now, I never claim that Israel and the occupied territories are the same. I just say they're under the same regime. And there are gradients, different practices of power over that, but you have to look at the master and say, with all the master's activities, right? You cannot just say, well, I choose to look at one part of this master, what they do over the slaves, and not in the other part. If you conceptualize the Israeli regime, and of course it's much more than that, because there's about 450,000 Israeli citizens, Jews who live in the territories. It complicates. And this is why I say it's an imaginary unit to some extent, because even if you analyze Israeli elections, 4 critical elections in Israel history were determined by the Jewish settlers in the territories. That is, if one counted only the votes in the green line, the left would have won, not the right. Okay? So this is one point that is much more elaborated why we need to count the territories. Israel...
Oren, please, don't monopolize.
No, don't monopolize. 2 more points, because I just addressed the...
Be short.
Okay, 1 more point. Israel builds the wall, which is a major Israeli decision, only in the West Bank. which also shows that Israel in the Green Line is not the right. Two more very quick points about land expropriation and Arab rights. If a minority in any state that anybody knows here was not allowed to purchase residence in 80% of the land, right, would you say that this is a liberal democracy? The Arab citizens of Israel, through institutional practices, not by law, but through very solid institutional practices, cannot purchase land in 80% of the country. And this is the continuation of the land expropriation. And the last thing is Jewish diaspora. Nowhere, and I have to refute that, nowhere do I say that Jews in the diaspora are totally empowered. I say they have a degree of empowerment, and this is very important. They have a degree of empowerment over two critical things, what you say, the JNF and other institutions that have a part of the Israeli regime, and most critically over immigration. Immigration is a critical factor in the structure of ethnocracies. They prevent, like in Estonia and like in Sri Lanka, they prevent the entry of the non-wanted, and they encourage, and that is why every Jew around the world is potentially an Israeli citizen, and this is a form of empowerment over a contested state. Thank you.
Thank you. Epi? Let me, please, run the show. Thank you. Can Epi, please?
Or maybe more. Well, first of all, to Sammy, and by implication also to Oren, I think that your idea of creating typologies of democracy, I think, is fruitful as an analytic tool, but then I think you should have go on in your search. And then, if you would have gone further on, to find types of democracies, you may find other bases of types that your term democracy is to some extent lesser or more. For example, there are democracies which maybe are based on religion, or so you or something like this. I don't know why you stopped at the ethnic. That's one thing. It's also not clear whether, when you say lesser, is it a matter of degree? Because then, what is the distinction between when a society ceases to be democracy? For example, it's not clear in your scheme. And what is the kind of democracy which is not lesser than the ideal type? I'm using ideal type in the Weberian sense. Would you say that, for example, European countries that now limit immigration only to East Europeans, are there lesser democracies? And this is, of course, are there ethnocracies, or maybe racial democracies, because they prefer whites over black Africans? I mean, what are the second point, and here I refer, I think that Alan's concept or idea of using the criteria of linkage to the state, I think, is very fruitful, and I think that it should be pursued over, although sometimes the linkage of the state is not sufficient, because or not a fine distinction enough. For example, as far as I know, and I'm not an expert on European and all European democracies, but I think that, for example, in England, the Anglican church is the dominant church, and I think that the ruler or the queen or the king must be an Anglican. So
no,
here
he is the head of the church.
Yeah, he is the head of the church itself. So is this what you mean by state linkage? Then by this criterion, of course, England is not...
But England has a people's blood.
Owen, I didn't want to go to bed. The question of marriage is more, in fact, an internal Jewish issue, because the Jewish state does not interfere at all in the marriages and divorce, etc., of Arabs. So,
Oren.
I think we are very patient to what you have said and what you have written. So please,
let's be democratic here. Okay.
So anyhow, so this is something that I would like. And then finally, what you do about those subtle cases, so to speak, of Japan, for example, which on the face of it seems to be an ideal democracy. It's not linked to the state, and yet everybody who studied Japan, even superficially, knows that if you are not of a Japanese origin, it is very difficult to become a Japanese citizen. So what I'm saying here is that there is something that I'm missing here in these typologies from an analytic point of view that I think should be further explored. And really the last point, and this is more, granted that these typologies are fruitful, I think what I'm missing also is a theory which specifies, or tries at least to specify, under what conditions this type or another type of democracies tend to be to emerge. And I have a kind of almost a Machiavellian kind of hypothesis that so-called liberal democracies, or those countries that we regard as liberals, I think that they can afford to be liberal democracies so long as they don't feel threatened, or they take their existential aspect for granted. Once they start to feel threatened, then they start to deviate from the ideal type of democracy to which they have been committed. And look on Western Europe these very days, when they start to feel, for the first time maybe in the last, at least since World War II, if not to go, but that somehow, whether it's the culture or whether it's the race, is becoming threatened. Thank you.
Thank you. You want to speak?
No.
Okay. Please.
Can I just make one observation? From my observation, many of the democracies of the world are characterized, and the principle is, by the flaws that they have developed to deal with the environmental circumstances of their particular territory. The chairman mentioned Singapore, for example. That's not a democracy, it's a one-party state where actually the laws of defamation are used to oppress anyone who wants to say anything of a controversial nature against any of the ruling elite. In fact, you have got a form of aristocracy there, where the son of Lee Kuan Yew ultimately will assume the ascendancy of a form of royalty there. If you move then to Malaysia, in Malaysia you've got ostensibly a democracy, but it's not really a democracy, because the Bumiputras have power of the commercial circumstances and the institutional commercial principles that say that you cannot undertake major commercial activity in Malaysia unless a Bumiputra is your partner. Further, Chinese schools are prevented from teaching the languages and traditions of the Chinese people in Malaysia. One then can move again, as Oren spoke about, Sri Lanka, with the institutional flaws that have developed in their own circumstances. It was only in the 1960s, in my own country, Australia, that Aboriginals and Indigenous people were given rights. In fact, in reverse, in our Constitution, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are given all sorts of benevolent but in many senses insulting privileges under our Constitution, which has actually led very frequently to their terrible circumstances. So the principle that would appear to me as an observer from the other side of the world is that the principle is that the flaws developed to meet the circumstances of the day-to-day lives of the particular countries in which you have described. And the democracy that exists is, in general terms, a democracy which treats the people well. But there has to be an overall consciousness of the minority people that they are treated with respect. And as Binyamin has described, yeah, there are many flaws in the Israeli model, many flaws in them. I don't think they can be described as principles. They're described as isolated incidents or general incidents of the shortcomings in our system to treat fairly and equitably with the minority people. And whether the minority people are the Israeli Palestinians or the Reform Jews or the Russians or whoever, that's where the attention has to turn. And it will probably turn to a greater degree when the emphasis is more on egalitarian issues like health, education, and sport than on issues of defence and looking too instinctively back to the natural histories, which often are the obstacle.
Thank you. Excuse. Please. Please. Two more questions. You, or comments. You, and then we turn. No, sorry. I'm sorry. But you don't agree. So we speak about later. Please.
Can we move to a less controversial country, such as Slovakia? Such as Slovakia. I never thought I would defend Slovak democracy, but I am going to now. Sammy and I agree that he's pessimistic about Slovakia, and I am too optimistic. But I think he's a bit too pessimistic. Oh, I think you're a bit too pessimistic, Sammy. Anyway, what I wanted to mention was, this is just a comment. You say that Slovakia was allowed into European Union because it was okay. Well, actually, it wasn't so easy. Slovakia was initially excluded from European integration because of its minority problems. So it wasn't easy to join European Union, and they had to do quite a lot for it. That's just a comment. But then you also said that the ethnic democracy, when you actually looked for ethnic democracy in Slovakia, that it's a system designed to, and then you clarify it. Now, I am not convinced that the system in Slovakia was in any way designed, because it became independent almost by default. But even if it were designed as an ethnic democracy, how do you then explain that from this system designed to be an ethnic democracy in 1993, by 1998, a Hungarian minority becomes a part of the power structure of the government, and there is not one demonstration on the street? So it couldn't have been such a great design, or it was a very failed design, because it only lasted 5 years. So that's kind of a question, and I'll leave it there because we all want coffee.
Okay, please come and try to catch the...
Yeah.
He's not a participant in conference, and Professor Venezuela wants to say.
Okay, so I promised that she will also have but he is here. He wants to say something.
We don't have time. I also want to say, but it's not time.
You see,
thank you. I should be
brother.
I should be very brief. This is to the first two speakers about the ethnic democracy and its flaws. There is an inbuilt contradiction in the claim you make against this kind of state, and in the criticism of countries like Slovakia or like Israel, which you call ethnic democracy. The assumption is that it would be a more perfect democracy if it ignored its own ethnic identity and gave more respect to the ethnic identity of the minorities within it, whatever their intentions or roles they're going to play in that state. And I think that is such an absurd assumption to make that it needs to be discussed. I mean, we heard in previous sessions, we heard from a person who is extremely well versed in for instance, in the assumptions of the Islamic Brotherhood, that the intention is to flood the state of Israel and become a majority in it. So the state of Israel should cease to be an ethnic democracy, should give free range, absolute civil rights to a minority which intends to flood it and do away with it. So why is the minority more entitled to its own ethnic aims than the majority?
Okay. Thank you. Now we will turn to the speakers to react. And I propose that we follow the same order as before. Or you want to change, to shift orders? Okay, so Sammy, you start.
I'm in danger?
I'm not in danger. You are simply wrong. That's what you are. Listen, I mean, ethnic democracy is a combination of factors. You cannot just isolate factors. Israel is an ethnic democracy because it declares itself to be an ethnic democracy. To start to begin with, it declares itself to be an ethnic democracy exactly because of what you said, Hedva. She wants to be a Jewish state controlled by Jews, for Jews, to solve the Jewish problem in the world. That's why. I mean, this is all, and this was taken to be legitimate. So it's not that something, there is no flaws in that. He said Israel has some flaws in democracy. It's not flaws. It is legitimate, international legitimate. This is why it is not ethnocracy. Because there is no way to legitimate ethnocracy. But you can legitimate ethnic democracy. That's the substantial difference between ethnocracy and Israel institutionalized so many mechanisms to make sure that Israel will have not only a Jewish majority, to increase a Jewish majority. Where you have such a country in the world? As the whole state was designed for Jews, it's controlled by Jews. Now, at the same time, you have Arabs in Israel enjoy democracy. Enjoy democracy, a real democracy. So I'm not saying, but there is contradiction between these principles. So this is not a liberal democracy because you don't have this inherent contradiction. You have to be intellectually honest to say that. Now, you can say, look, I can pay the price for this kind of state. But to say it is liberal democracy where only have some flaws, here is deviations. What kind of deviations? It's a completely different system. It's not liberal. It has 2 official languages. How come you have a liberal democracy with 2 official languages? Now, we said Israel has a law of return. Other countries have a law of return. I will suggest to you, not only Belgium, Germany is the closest it can come to this, and Finland and Greece and many countries. But you don't have such extreme case of law of return as in Israel. There is no such extreme. And I'm telling you one by one. You don't have. Because the Israeli case of law of return has almost no limits. In Germany, the law of return applies only to Germans in Eastern Europe, or those Jews or not Jews, Germans who suffered. The American German has no, he cannot return to Germany and get citizenship. In Israel, every Jew can get it. There is no limits. And why? Because you want to build a state with a Jewish majority. That's why. And you want a Jewish majority, a Jewish culture, everything. Jewish interest. Now, and this is considered to be legitimate. This is the difference between this and discrimination against other groups. So it's a special case. And all these cases, Macedonia, but Macedonia was ethnic democracy only from 2000 to 2003. When it became independent, not 2000. In the 1991 to 2003, and then became closer to binational state. So it was unstable as ethnic democracy. Now, Northern Ireland was ethnic democracy from 1921 to 1973 or so. I mean, there are cases, but today, none of these 7 cases which are examined. For me, Estonia, it's not ethnic democracy. Why? Because it doesn't extend citizenship. Most Russians in Latvia and in Estonia are not citizens of the state. So they are not part of democracy. So I have my own conditions when a country is ethnic democracy, which is not an ethnic democracy. The first condition that everybody has a citizenship, has political rights. Now, when it stops to be ethnic democracy, there are. I mean, in my articles, I specify the conditions of the emergence, the condition for stability of ethnic democracies. Now, and the main thing are threats. You have, in order to have ethnic democracy, you have to have national or collective threats. The Jews, you have a Jewish state or Jewish democracy because the Jews are threatened. They are threatened by the survival of the big threat of the survival of the Jewish people. This is Zionism all about. Zionism says, and this is a Zionist state, that a Jewish state is needed to make sure that the Jews as a people will survive. You need a Jewish state for that. There is another threat that Israel is in hostile environment against the Arab world, which was liquidated, and there are also another threat from the Arab community, the Arab minority, which they are struggling for a binational state. So there are big threats that you need a Jewish state to contain them. Now the same structure of ethnic democracy reinforce the threats. I mean, but that's dialectic. What can you do? Now, Erika, you ask, yes, you ask how come there is no, say, mass protest when the party, the Hungarian party, was taken into coalition government. Do you think that if tomorrow that Arabs will be into coalition government, will be a mass threat in Israel? What the hell they will? They will be in government. They are changing the character of the state of Slovakia. They resolve the problems, all the pending problems. They don't. What they do, I mean, they make it, you know, they ameliorate this, improve the situation and so forth, but they are not changing the character of the state. That's my point. It's better to be in the government and then preserve the ethnic nature of the state than to be out, and then you expose the nature of the state. So much for that. You are asked why you have such typologies, ethnic typologies. You have it because I'm working on democracy vis-à-vis minorities, not vis-à-vis other problems. So that's why you have this kind of now. As far as I have 0 point, and as far as Japan is concerned, and Arab and other liberal democracies. Liberal democracies, when they are threatened by minorities, they will become ethnic. That's it. Because the whole model is based on threats. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Please.
Well, no existing democracy is perfect, so don't be surprised if ethnic democracy is also something bad. But let me point out that in these 7 cases, which we studied in the book, they all failed, yes, because the states were weak and there was international intervention. Various European structures tried to prevent emergence of ethnic democracy, and they put pressure on legislators and governments to change rules. And in some cases they were efficient, in some cases they were not. But there was such an intervention, and this was one of the causes of failure. And here we come to answer to this question: under what conditions, which kind of democracies emerge? If you are interested anymore, okay. Under what conditions, which democracies emerge? You asked the question, yeah. And here comes the answer. What this project showed, that under the conditions of coming out of the totalitarian or already authoritarian communist regimes, the ethnically divided societies make a very visible attempt to switch to such type of democracy, which can be characterized as ethnic, which means that they try to maximize the power of one ethnic group. They fail, okay, but what is interesting is this initial attempt, a very strong wish to do so. They even put it sometimes in this way that one Latvian said, well, Latvia can be Latvian or democratic. So even, you know, there is even such such vision. It was said back in 1990. About the avoidance of ethnic terminology. Yes, of course, it was trick. And the proof that it was trick was that nobody was surprised later on when, after the implementation of the citizenship law, 20% of the population were out of citizenship, and they were all Russians or Russian speakers, and nobody said, oh, look what happened. No, nobody was surprised. So it means it was so-called grand design. But formally, all papers are correct, you know. All the laws are written like European laws, but normal European laws. But situation was not normal, you know. Normal laws do not function well in abnormal situation. Well, question is not that to avoid ethnic democracy you should deny a majority some ethnicity or what, but why to put the minorities on a lower level? This is the question. Minorities could be put on the possibilities for them should be open at the more or less the same level. For example, the Estonian preamble of Estonian constitution could say that state is created for the development and preservation of all groups, ethnic groups, peoples living in the territory of this republic, you know, and not just putting that all the others have to take care of one group, you know, to see that it survives. So this is some nuances which can be selected.
Thank you very much. Benny, please.
Okay, a few points. First, Sammy, I think you really put everything on its head. I mean, I defended the concept of Jewish democracy, and you accuse me now of pointing out the flaws. I just want to remind you that in all your writings on ethnic democracy, you talk about a low-quality democracy. And the example of Ireland, for instance, Northern Ireland from the 1970s, you had severe oppression of the Catholic minority in that period. And may I also remind you that in your first book, you were even more extreme. You talked about Herrenvolk democracy in '78. So now, then you left that and went to ethnic democracy. But to say that I'm pointing out the flaws and you are saying that a Jewish state is something normal, I think is really not
normal from its point of view.
Not completely fair. Now to Alan, I don't accept that. Ethno-cultural dominance is not institutionalized in other states. Take France from. I don't think you have in France a Breton, a Provençal, a Muslim, a Basque school system. That's an institutionalization of ethno-cultural dominance. So why is that so different from the Israeli system? To Oren, I think. Even the word ethnocracy emphasizes ethnos, and this is emphasized also by Jaerve Peled, who writes about it, that the ethnos is the main thing and not the demos. And about the territory, you are very clear-cut. I mean, I quote now Oren Yiftachel. Israel proper is a political and territorial entity which has long ceased to exist. Now, I accept as a severe flaw the existence of occupied territories and settlement, everything you said. But to say that that there is no difference anymore, and Israel proper ceased to exist, and everything we talked about it in the other sessions about the proper solution, which almost everybody agreed is just nonsense. I think I was quoting you. And the final point, and here I refer, I think, also to what Richard says, the examples, by the way, quoted by the ethnic democracy theories and the ethnocracy theories, both adopt several states, they quarrel between themselves. I mean, Slovakia and Serbia and Malaysia and so on. And what I would like to say, these are all flawed democracies. And our model of a liberal democracy should be basically the Western democracy. That should be the yardstick. And we should measure the deviations from what is common in these liberal Western democracies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that we had a very lovely session. And we deserve now a break.